Okay, so I'm gonna do a demo for you guys of how to prep and sew the corset muslin up. I know that it's a little confusing, so I'm gonna do it from start to finish for you in this video. So one thing I want you to do, if you think about a corset, it's going to have thicker layers because of interfacing and things like that. So instead of just sewing up a muslin that consists of one layer of muslin, I want you to sew up a muslin that's made up of 2 layers of muslin, meaning that every pattern piece, instead of being 1 layer of muslin, will be 2, okay? So I'm going to lay out my 2 pieces of muslin. So here's my first piece, and bring my salvages together. Make sure it's nice and flat so it's on grain. There's one. And we'll do the same with the second piece of muslin. So I'll bring my salvages together. Get the bubbles out of it. Good. And then line up the salvages of that one with the other one. And make sure that your folds are perfectly matching as well if you have any pieces that you're cutting on fold. And really what you want to do instead of cutting on fold, just make the full pattern piece. But for the sake of this demo, we're just going to do it on fold. Alright, there we go. So let's go ahead and pin our pattern pieces on. Here's my first piece. It's on fold. I'm going to place, it's my front piece, I'm going to place that center front right on fold. And I don't need to measure the grain off the salvage because the fold is on grain. And now I'll pin this piece on. Make sure you're smoothing out as you pin. There we go. All right, let's go. I'm just going to do a quick rough layout. Make sure all my pieces fit. Okay, so again, we're cutting 2 layers of fabric for each piece. Yes, those fit fine. All right, so make sure you measure off your salvage or your fold to your grain line to make sure you get it perfectly on grain. So here, for example, I have 4. So for example, here I have 4 on my fold, okay, on my ruler, and then I'm going to put, let's see, this at 10.5, and then I'll move it up. Okay, 4, and I had this at 10.5, there we go. This pattern piece is now on grain. Pin it through. And you'll do this with all of your pieces. Okay. All right, now I'll put on our last 2 pieces. And measuring off salvage. That's good. And my last piece here. There we go. All right, now I'm ready to cut out. Notice here's my center back. I gave myself an inch of seam allowance at center back because you never know if that's where your closure is going to be. If you need a little bit more, it's always good to give yourself a little bit more seam allowance back there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this out real quick. Okay, if you don't have a center front seam, make sure you notch your center front on the crease at the top and at the bottom of your corset. There we go. All right, so there's our front, side back, back. We want to make sure that we label or we transfer all our markings, meaning our balance lines, which is our waist, bust, and hip line if you have it, okay? So make sure you have notches at the end of each of those lines so that we can easily transfer them. And you only need to transfer them to one side, meaning that only the left or right side needs the markings. Okay, so we'll do that right now as we unpin. I'll mark it in red. I like to just mark my notches that I'm going to be marking. It makes it easier to find them. And here. Okay. And now I have, again, 2 layers of muslin for each pattern piece. So I have my 2 backs, 2 layers of muslin. Make sure these don't move around too much on you when you're stitching them. Put some pins in there. I find right through the center works just fine. And the same with this one too. There's my backs. Let's do side back. And again, if you don't have a seam at center front, I want you to mark your center front on there as well. Okay, we're ready to go to the sewing machine now. Grab our pieces. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is stay stitch all our pieces on the neckline and at the hem of it, on the bottom of it. So top and bottom, you're going to stay stitch. Your stay stitching will be your seam allowance, so a 1/2 inch away from the edge. So let's go ahead and do that. And for the sake of time, I just like to stitch each piece instead of cutting in between. Okay, so now I've just stay stitched the neckline of every piece. Let's also stay stitch the hem of every piece with the bottom. Half inch. Alright, stay stitched the back or the bottom and top of every piece. Let's go ahead. Clip them. Alright. One more thing we want to stay stitch. And that is our center back line. Okay. So remember we have an inch seam allowance, so I'm going to stay stitch my center back at an inch. That way I know exactly where the center back is. Alright, so now we're ready to put this garment together. Okay, start with my princess seams in the front and go from there. Okay, there it is, all sewn up. All right. Here it is, all sewn up. So we can take all the pins out of it. And now we'll give it a press. Now if you have a sharp curve like this, you'll want to probably clip into it a little bit. Don't clip in a lot, only where you need it. Just so the seam allowance can open up nicely. So I'm clipping about every inch. And at the waist as well. The waist I like to clip, and then about 2 inches above and 2 inches below, give or take. It's because our waist is pretty fitted and tight, so I find this will help with that seam open allowance. It won't be fighting itself, trying to open up. It'll be a nice smooth seam. Okay, there we go. So let's go ahead and press it, and then we can put it on the draping form. And you have 2 layers of fabric, so make sure you just really tug on them and get them nice and pulled apart tightly. The hardest part is doing the princess seam in the front. So again, just make sure you're getting that seam nicely opened up and nice and flat before you press on it. Use your ham to really just get into the curve of it. So you don't want to press any kind of folds or pleats or anything into it. There it is pressed. There it is, nice and pressed, and now we can put it on the form. Okay, here it is on the form. It's been sewn and pressed. Give it a spin. The side view of it. And then the back view. Okay, you can see that how important it is to have your center back marked so you can see exactly where it needs to be pinned. Right? And you'll notice here that the waistline does not match. Right there at the back princess, it's about a quarter off or so. But I actually think the whole pattern piece is lining up. So I believe I just marked it wrong there. And if it's off a little bit, that's not a big deal. Okay. So, and then you can see center front is lined up with center front. Okay, bust line with bust line. So there it is. That's basically what that's how I want you to put together your corset muslin.